There is something hauntingly peaceful about a man who walks calmly toward his death, not because he must, but because he believes. Socrates did not leave behind any books, no grand memoirs or philosophical treatises penned by his own hand. What he left instead was a way of being, an echo in the dark silence of the human soul that asks, "What is the good life? And am I living it?" He walked the dusty streets of ancient Athens like a question that had taken human form. Barefoot, unshaven, draped in a plain tunic, Socrates was not a teacher in the usual sense. He never charged for his wisdom. He never claimed to have the answers. In fact, what made him extraordinary was that he insisted he didn't know. He simply listened, gently asked, and guided others, sometimes without them realizing, toward the edges of their own certainty. He was like a mirror, one that didn't flatter, but reflected. And many found that uncomfortable. Because Socrates didn't allow you to hide behind titles or tradition or the safety of what everyone else thinks. He would ask, "Why do you believe that? Is it true? Or have you merely repeated it so many times that you've stopped noticing it isn't yours?" To walk with Socrates, even in thought, is to be lovingly unraveled. He pulls the thread of your assumptions not to embarrass you, but to free you. He believed that an unexamined life wasn't worth living, not because life becomes meaningless without answers, but because it becomes hollow without the courage to ask. At the heart of his method was a kind of philosophical tenderness. The Socratic dialogue is not a battle, it's a dance. Two minds circling each other, teasing out contradictions, lighting small lanterns in the fog of inherited beliefs. And always returning to the question, what is good? What is just? What is true? But asking such questions comes at a cost. In a world that rewards conformity, Socrates became a disturbance. He questioned the powerful, the comfortable, the righteous. He made people think, and in doing so, made many of them deeply uncomfortable. They accused him of corrupting the youth, of dishonoring the gods. But really, what they feared was a man who could not be silenced by fear. When the court found him guilty, Socrates was given the chance to flee. Friends arranged for his escape, but he stayed. Not because he wanted to die, but because he refused to betray the very ideas he had lived for. He had always taught that one must respect the laws, that one must not return injustice for injustice. To run would make his life a contradiction. So he drank the hemlock quietly, surrounded by students who wept, while he consoled them. That final scene is not tragic. It is luminous. A man, calm as the poison works its way through his veins, still questioning, still explaining, still offering clarity until his voice fades. Death did not defeat Socrates. It merely punctuated his life with a period so firm and clear that his legacy could never be erased. And yet, what remains most alive is not his death, but his way of living. His belief that truth matters more than comfort, that asking is more sacred than knowing, that the best kind of teacher is the one who listens. Tonight, if you're lying awake, tangled in your own thoughts, perhaps you can imagine Socrates sitting nearby. Not to give you advice, not to offer solutions, but simply to ask, what is it you fear right now? Is it real, or is it something you've never fully examined? He would not rush you. He would not push you. He would simply sit beside you in the quiet and remind you that within you is a light, not of certainty, but of curiosity. That to be confused is not weakness, it's the beginning of honesty. That to admit I don't know is not failure, but a kind of opening, a door left ajar for truth to one day walk through. And maybe, as your eyes begin to close, you can carry one small fragment of his spirit into your dreams. A whisper that says, live with questions, trust the journey, and let your life speak more than your answers ever could. Good night, fellow seeker. Sometimes, even with our eyes wide open, we do not see. We move through the world, surrounded by shapes and colors and motion, and we call it reality. But what if this reality were only a shadow, soft and distorted, flickering against a wall, and beyond it, hidden in a place few dare to look, lies the real? Plato lived in the wake of Socrates, and he never forgot him. That day when his teacher calmly drank poison rather than abandon the truth, it etched itself deep into Plato's soul. And from that sorrow bloomed something luminous, a lifelong quest to find a world that could not be taken by politics, by opinion, or by death. He wrote in dialogues, like quiet plays unfolding in the mind. And in one of them, he told a story that still lives in the heart of philosophy. a story not loud or complex, but quiet and unsettling. A story of people chained in a cave, facing a wall, seeing only shadows cast by flickering firelight. They believe those shadows are all there is, until one of them turns, climbs out of the cave, and for the first time, sees the sun. The allegory of the cave is not just a myth, it is a mirror. For how often do we mistake appearance for truth? How often do we accept what is shown to us, simply because it's always been so? Plato's cave is not a place, it is a state of mind, and the journey out of it is not made with the feet, but with the soul. To Plato, the world we touch, the one of objects, people, cities, and politics, is only a copy, a trembling echo. True reality, he believed, lies beyond the senses. In the realm of forms, where beauty itself exists, not just beautiful things, where goodness is not an act, but a presence, where truth is not relative, but eternal. It sounds distant, perhaps, but Plato was never interested in distance. His vision was not of escape, but of return. He believed that within each of us, like a forgotten melody, lives a memory of something purer, that to learn is not to gather new information, but to remember what the soul already knows, like waking from a long sleep and recognizing a face we'd loved once, long ago, in another life. He saw the soul as eternal, migrating from body to body like a quiet traveler, carrying the seeds of wisdom, longing always to return home to that radiant world beyond shadow. And in this life, through love, through beauty, through questions that stir us to wonder, we glimpse that world again. Plato's love for the truth was not dry or cold. It was full of warmth. He believed in the power of love, not just romantic love, but love as the pull toward the eternal. When we fall in love with someone's mind, or when we feel stirred by a sunset, or drawn to music that makes our chest ache, we are, in that moment, being pulled upward, not just towards someone or something, but towards something more. He called this upward longing eros, not simply desire, but a kind of winged yearning, a longing not to possess, but to remember. And from this love, philosophy is born. Plato imagined the ideal city too, not as a place of walls and weapons, but of justice, of wisdom, of balance. He envisioned leaders who were philosophers, those who could see beyond self-interest, who had trained their minds to seek the good not just for themselves, but for the whole. He knew it was a dream, but even so, he dreamed it boldly. And perhaps that is what sets Plato apart. He did not stop at seeing the flaws of the world. He dared to imagine something better, not perfect in the human sense, but true in the eternal sense. He reached beyond what was toward what could be, and in doing so, he offered us all a ladder to climb, if only we wish to. Tonight, as you lie still beneath the hush of sleep, maybe you feel a flicker, like the faint memory of a star once seen in a sky long gone. A part of you, older than words, remembers the light. Maybe that's what Plato meant all along, that we are not strangers to truth, only forgetful. And that to live well is to live in such a way that we are always turning toward that light, slowly, bravely, lovingly. Let the world of noise dim now. Let the shadows on the wall lose their grip. There is nothing to chase tonight, only to rest. Only to allow the soul to lean gently upward, like a leaf lifted by a breeze you do not need to see to believe. Good night, philosopher of the cave. May your dreams remember what your eyes once knew. Some minds drift through life like clouds, ever changing, ever feeling, but others move like rivers, seeking patterns, flowing steadily toward understanding. Aristotle was such a river, calm, curious, grounded. If Plato dreamed of a world beyond the senses, Aristotle turned his gaze to the one beneath his feet, the one he could touch, see, hear, and question until it revealed its quiet architecture. He was a student of Plato, but he did not follow blindly. He listened, pondered, and then gently diverged. For while Plato searched for eternal forms, Aristotle looked into the trembling leaf, the falling rain, the animal in motion, and found something just as miraculous. He believed that the truth was not hidden in another world. It was right here, and it could be known. He walked slowly through nature, observing. Everything mattered: the way a horse moves, the shape of a seashell, the rhythm of the stars. No detail was too small, no creature too insignificant. To Aristotle, knowledge was not built on belief, but on careful attention. He was a lover of the world, not its myths, but its mechanisms. And in understanding how a thing works, he found beauty. He studied the body, the mind, the soul, He wrote about ethics, logic, music, politics, physics, biology, poetry, memory, friendship, dreams. Not with the abstraction of the mystic, but with the quiet patience of someone who believes the world makes sense, if only we listen long enough. To him, every living thing has a purpose, a reason for being. A seed grows toward a tree not by chance, but by nature. A human longs for meaning not by accident, but because within us is a kind of blueprint, a gentle pull toward becoming what we are meant to be. He called this pull enteleki, the inner urge to fulfill our own essence. It sounds simple, but it's a quiet revolution. For in saying that everything has a purpose, Aristotle offered a vision of the world that is not chaotic, but ordered, not cold, but alive. And in that world, we are not lost, we are becoming. He believed the highest good in life was eudaimonia, not happiness in the modern, fleeting sense, but a deeper flourishing, a life of balance, of reason, of virtue, a life lived with intention, where we do not simply feel good, but become good. Not because someone tells us to, but because the soul finds peace in harmony. Virtue, to Aristotle, was not a rule, it was a habit, something shaped over time, like a path worn gently into the ground by many quiet steps. Courage was not fearlessness, but learning to act rightly despite fear. Generosity was not grand giving, but giving in the right way, at the right time, for the right reasons. Wisdom was not knowledge alone, but knowing how to live. And yet, he did not ask us to be perfect, only to move toward excellence, slowly, patiently, through daily practice, like tuning an instrument or tending a small garden. We become what we repeatedly do. And so, a good life is built not in a single moment, but in the gentle rhythm of our choices. He also knew we are not meant to live alone. Friendship, he wrote, is one of the highest goods, not as a luxury, but as a necessity of the soul. We mirror each other. We grow through each other. In the presence of a true friend, we see who we are and who we might become. Friendship is not escape, it is reflection. In his Nicomachean Ethics, named after his son, he offers no commandments, no thunder from above, only questions, observations, a slow unfolding. He trusted that the thoughtful person would find their way, not by force, but by insight, and that each of us holds within the potential to live wisely if we take time to listen to the quiet within. And so Aristotle walked through nature, through ideas, through the corridors of reason. He taught Alexander the Great, yet never glorified conquest. His power was not in his voice, but in his calm. In a world that often rushes toward extremes, he remained in the middle, measured, balanced, patient. And perhaps that is why his ideas still breathe in our sciences, in our language, in our understanding of the world and of ourselves. Tonight, if your thoughts feel scattered, if your spirit feels lost in abstraction or confusion, maybe Aristotle can offer a soft kind of grounding. His voice does not shout, it hums. It reminds you that the truth is not far. It is here, in the rhythm of breath, the feel of your body resting, the quiet unfolding of your own becoming. There is no rush, no test to pass. The good life is not something to chase. It is something to build, moment by moment, breath by breath. By listening, by observing, by tending gently to the inner balance. Let the chaos fall away now. Let the extremes soften. Let your soul rest in the middle place, where truth is slow but steady. And as your eyes close, remember, you are not broken. You are unfolding. Just as a seed grows toward its shape, you too are moving, quietly, invisibly, toward the fullness of who you are. Sleep well, gentle philosopher. The world is more ordered than it seems, and so are you. He did not raise his voice. He did not seek war or build empires. He walked slowly, spoke gently, and bowed often, not in fear, but in respect. And yet the ripples of his thought spread farther than many armies ever marched. His name was Kongqiu, known to the world as Confucius. And he believed, with a patience deeper than time, that the way to change the world was not through conquest, but through character. He lived in a time of chaos, warring states, broken codes, leaders hungry for power but starved of virtue. Where others saw disorder as license to grasp and dominate, Confucius looked around and saw something else, forgetfulness. Not of law, but of heart. Not of rituals, but of their spirit. A society that had forgotten how to be human with one another. And so he began to walk, from one state to another, from court to court. Not to beg for influence, but to offer a way. A path not paved with ambition, but with inner clarity. He called it Ren, a word that does not translate cleanly, but lives somewhere between kindness, humanity, compassion, and integrity. It is the hum beneath every true word, the stillness behind every noble act, the goodness we were born with, but must remember again and again. To Confucius, a well-lived life was not built on greatness. It was built on small things done with care, bowing to elders, speaking truthfully, serving one's parents, holding silence when the heart is uncertain. It was in these seemingly simple acts that one learned to be human and to live in harmony with others. He believed that harmony was not an accident. It had to be cultivated. Like music, like tea, like peace. And it began not in laws, but in the self. To govern a nation, first govern the family. To govern the family, first govern the self. And to govern the self, one must cultivate virtue, not for praise, but for peace. He spoke of the Junzi, the noble person, but nobility to him had nothing to do with birth. A Junzi is not born, it is chosen, shaped, and refined through conduct, through humility, through the slow polishing of the soul against the stone of daily life. A Junzi is not perfect, but they are steady. They return again and again to the path of what is right, not out of fear, but out of love for what is just. He was a teacher, not of facts, but of becoming. His students did not memorize, they listened, watched, grew. And he rarely gave direct answers. Instead, he offered sayings, brief and reflective, like still water that shows your own face if you're willing to look. When asked about government, he spoke of self-cultivation. When asked about heaven, he pointed to ethics. For to Confucius, the divine was not somewhere else. It was woven into how we treat one another. He honored the past, not out of nostalgia, but because he believed the ancestors had glimpsed something sacred. Rituals mattered, not for their form, but for their function, to remind us that we are not alone, not separate, not above one another. When we bow, we humble our pride. When we serve, we soften our ego. When we speak gently, we create space for others to bloom. These things matter, not because they are grand, but because they shape the soul quietly. He saw education as a lifelong unfolding, and he never claimed to know all things. At 15, he said, I set my heart on learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no doubts. At 50, I understood heaven's will. He grew not in power, but in wisdom, not in certainty, but in clarity. And through that clarity, he taught generations to come, not through force, but through example. He was mocked, rejected by rulers, sometimes met with silence, and yet he'd not grow bitter. He kept teaching, kept walking, kept writing. Because to him, even if the world does not change quickly, the soul still can. One heart at a time, one day at a time. And that was enough. Tonight, if you find yourself restless, caught in a world that rewards loudness and punishes stillness, let Confucius sit beside you. Let his presence, calm as a lantern in the fog, remind you that the path to peace is not far away. It is already under your feet, in the way you breathe, in the way you greet someone in the morning, in how you speak to those you love and to those you disagree with. There is no race to run, no glory to chase, only the gentle art of becoming whole, of treating others not as tools, but as reflections, of remembering that dignity is not something we demand, but something we offer. Close your eyes now. Let the noise of the world soften. You are not behind. You are not lost. You are simply on the path. And the path is made not by running, but by walking with presence, step by step, moment by moment, ritual by ritual, word by word. Sleep gently tonight, with the wisdom of a man who believed that to bow is not to surrender, but to honor what is sacred in all of us. Good night, quiet teacher. Your steps still echo. He came and went like a whisper. No one knows exactly when he was born, or if he even truly lived as a single man, but perhaps that is the point. Laozi, the old master, was less a person than a presence, like the wind moving through bamboo, unseen but unmistakable. He left behind a small book, the Tao Te Ching, only about 5,000 characters long, and yet it holds an entire universe inside. He did not argue. He did not persuade. He simply wrote as one would leave footprints in the sand, soft, transient, but unmistakably human. He watched the world and noticed what others missed. That water is soft, yet wears down stone. That silence says more than noise. That the greatest power is the one that does not seek control. The Tao, he wrote, is the way, but it is not a path you can follow in the usual sense. It is not made of steps or rules. It is not something you master. It flows like a river. It is everywhere and nowhere. It moves through all things, through light and dark, joy and sorrow, birth and death. To live well is not to resist it, but to move with it. Laozi did not believe in domination, in forcing others or oneself. He saw how the world suffers when we grasp too tightly, speak too loudly, strive too fiercely. The more rules and laws, he wrote, the more thieves and robbers there will be. He understood that trying to control life often tightens the knot, and so he advised something simpler: let go. This letting go is not apathy, it is trust, a quiet surrender to the wisdom that already moves through all things. Just as trees bend with the wind, just as rivers find their path without effort, so too can we live, not by conquering, but by yielding, not by dominating life, but by listening to it. To Laozi, emptiness was not a lack, but a gift. The space inside a cup is what makes it useful. The silence between notes is what makes the music sing. The sage is not full of opinions, but of space. He does not compete, he does not shine, and because of that, he endures. When you are content to be simply yourself, he wrote, and don't compare or compete, everyone will respect you. He saw strength not in hardness, but in softness. The infant is more supple than the old man. Water, which yields to every shape, carves canyons over time. The Tao does not shout, it whispers. And those who are wise do not chase, they wait. They do not demand, they observe. They do not speak to be heard. They speak because silence has ripened into truth. Laozi's words come like wind through a quiet forest. You cannot seize them. You can only sit still enough to feel them pass through you. He did not speak of morality in rigid terms. He did not promise rewards or punishments. He simply described what is and invited us to look closer, to stop resisting the moment, to step out of our ego and into the vastness of what already is. He saw leadership not as command, but as humility. The best leader, he said, is one whose presence is barely noticed. When their work is done, the people say, "We did it ourselves." This is not weakness. This is mastery, to shape the world without bending it to one's will, to guide without force, to shine without seeking attention. There is a quiet courage in this way of being. It does not need to win. It does not need to prove. It simply is. And in that being, there is a peace that nothing outside can disturb. The sage is like a mirror, open, clear, unattached. He reflects the world without clinging to it. Perhaps that is why Laozi, at the end of his life, did not seek glory or monuments. Legend says that he mounted a water buffalo and rode west, leaving behind only the Tao Te Ching, his offering to a world too full of noise. He disappeared into the mountains. But his words remained, like ripples on a still pond, carrying the secret of stillness to those who would one day be quiet enough to hear. Tonight, as you lie in the gentle hush of night, Laozi's presence is not in the answers. It is in the space between questions. Not in striving, but in breathing. Not in becoming someone else, but in being completely yourself, simple, unforced, like the moon reflecting in a quiet lake. Let go, just a little. Let go of needing to know, to achieve, to control. The Tao is already here, in your breath, in the silence of this moment, in the rhythm of your heart as it slows to meet the night. You do not have to fight for peace. You only have to stop fighting. Trust the way beneath the way. Trust the current that carries you even when you do not understand it. Sleep now, gentle listener. The Tao flows through you. You do not have to catch it. You only have to feel it pass and let yourself float. Good night, old master. You spoke without speaking, and we are still listening. There are nights when the world feels too loud, when the voices outside blur with the voices within, and nothing feels certain anymore. On such a night, centuries ago, a man sat alone beside a flickering fire, staring not into the flames, but into the quiet mirror of his own mind. That man was René Descartes. He did not seek fame, he sought clarity. And in that search, he withdrew from the noise of the world, not out of fear, but because he believed that only in stillness could the truth be heard. Born in France, Descartes lived through a time of upheaval where old beliefs were crumbling and new sciences were being born. The heavens had shifted, literally, and the earth was no longer the center of the cosmos. Everything that had once felt solid now trembled. Faith, knowledge, meaning, all of it seemed uncertain. So Descartes did something radical. He stepped back from it all, not with anger, but with exquisite care. He questioned everything, Not only the world around him, but the very ground beneath his thoughts. What, he asked, can I know with absolute certainty? Not the senses, for they deceive us. Not the body, for it can fail. Not tradition, for it is full of error. Not even dreams, for they mimic waking life too well. He stripped everything away, layer by layer, belief by belief, until he reached a place of perfect silence, a kind of internal winter, bare, cold, but clear. And in that emptiness he found it, a single, undeniable truth. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't even a conclusion. It was a beginning, a soft spark in the void. The realization that if he could doubt, if he could question, if he could even wonder whether he existed, then something must be there to do the wondering, something real, something that cannot be erased. In that moment, Descartes did not discover the world. He discovered the self, not the self of vanity or pride, but the thinking self, the silent witness behind every experience, the one that persists even when all else is in question. From that still point, he began to build again, slowly, gently, like laying stones after a flood. If the mind is real, then what else can be known? What else can be trusted? And so began the architecture of modern philosophy, rooted not in tradition, but in reason. He believed that the universe was not chaos, but a kind of divine geometry, that behind the surface of things lay a deep and elegant logic, and that through thought, through careful reflection, we could come to understand it. The mind, he believed, was the most powerful instrument we had, not because it could feel, but because it could think. Yet for all his brilliance, Descartes was not cold. He was searching, always searching, not for dominance, but for clarity, not to control the world, but to understand how we come to know it. And that question, how we know, became the seed from which centuries of philosophy would grow. He gave us more than just a phrase. He gave us a mirror, and in it we see that before we are anything else, before we are citizens, bodies, names, we are awareness, quiet, persistent, awake. He spent much of his life in solitude, not out of isolation, but from devotion. He wrote, thought, walked, and wrote again. He moved through the world like a ghost of reason, never loud, but always precise. He spoke gently, as if shaping thought itself into something that could be held. And then, in the cold of Sweden far from home, he passed, not on a battlefield, not in drama, but in the simplicity of a winter morning, after trying to serve a queen too early in the day. His body was frail, but his thought remained, sharp, crystalline, unshaken. Tonight, if your mind feels full of questions, of doubt, of restless wandering, perhaps Descartes can sit beside you, not to silence your thoughts, but to walk with them. To remind you that even in confusion, even in doubt, there is something true. The very act of doubting is a kind of proof. The light of your mind is real, even when the world feels uncertain. Let the noise fade now. Let the questions soften. You do not have to solve everything. You do not have to be certain. You only have to return to that quiet space within you, the place before the names, the place that watches, the place that knows. You are not lost. You are thinking. And that, too, is a kind of being. Sleep now, thoughtful traveler. You do not need to find the answer tonight. It is enough to know that the one who wonders, the one behind the wondering, is real. Good night, Descartes. Your silence still speaks. He did not shout. He did not preach. He did not seek followers or titles. He lived quietly, polishing lenses for a living, tiny pieces of glass that brought the distant into focus. And perhaps that was fitting. For Baruch Spinoza was doing the same with philosophy, grinding thought until it could see the infinite with clarity. Born in Amsterdam, to a Jewish family that had fled persecution, Spinoza grew up between two worlds, one of tradition and one of new reason. He was gentle in speech but unwavering in thought. And when his questions began to pierce too deeply into sacred walls, his community expelled him. At just 23, he was excommunicated, cursed, disowned, abandoned. But he did not lash out. He stepped away. And in the silence that followed, he began to write, not for fame, not for vengeance, but for truth. A truth so radical and serene that even centuries later, it still unsettles and soothes in equal measure. Spinoza did not believe in a God of thunder and commandments. He believed in something far more intimate. For him, God was not a being, not a king, not someone out there. God was everything, the totality of existence, nature itself. Every leaf, every star, every breath you take, he saw it all as part of one infinite substance, one reality, one unity. He called it Deus sive natura, God or nature. Not two things, but one. To see nature clearly without illusion was to glimpse the divine. To Spinoza, this wasn't blasphemy, it was reverence. A devotion so deep it dissolved the need for miracles or dogma. The world itself was already holy. And yet, he was not mystical in his language. He wrote with the clarity of a mathematician. His ethics reads like a geometric proof. Definitions, axioms, propositions, each line leading with quiet inevitability to the next. He believed that reason was not the enemy of wonder, but its purest form. That to understand something deeply was to love it more truly. Freedom, to Spinoza, was not doing whatever you please. It was understanding who you are, seeing the forces that shape you, your fears, your desires, your habits, and stepping beyond them. Like a ship steering not by impulse, but by stars. We are free, he wrote, when we live not by passion, but by understanding. And this understanding leads to peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of union, with the truth, with nature, with the great whole of which we are each a part. In this view, the self is not an island. It is a wave on the sea. It rises, it falls, it sparkles for a time, but it never leaves the ocean. It is never apart. He called this kind of awareness intellectual love of God. Not a love of worship, but of oneness, a quiet, enduring joy that comes when we let go of the illusion of separateness. When we stop fighting the tides and begin to see that the tides are not against us, they are us. Spinoza lived simply. He refused academic posts. He declined honors. He stayed in a small room, wrote by candlelight, and made lenses to earn his bread. He coughed from the fine dust of glass. His lungs slowly gave way, but he kept polishing, both lenses and ideas. And when he died at the age of 44, he left behind no monuments. Only a few friends, a few books, and a vision of the world so clear, so vast, that it still invites the soul to breathe differently. Tonight, if you feel yourself scattered, torn between identities, lost in striving, Spinoza offers no slogans, no easy comfort, only a stillness, a vision of the self as not alone, not separate, but held, that even your pain, even your confusion is part of a larger unfolding, not random, not meaningless, but necessary, in ways we may not yet see. Let go now. Not into nothingness, but into everything, into the breath that connects you to the air, to the leaves outside your window, to the moon rising unseen. You are not an accident. You are a mode of something infinite, a single note in an eternal song. And though your voice may tremble, it belongs. It always has. Sleep now, quiet lens maker. You saw the whole in every part, and your clarity still reaches us, soft as starlight. Good night, Spinoza. The divine was never far, it was always close. Imagine a page, blank, untouched, waiting. To John Locke, that was the human mind at birth, not filled with innate ideas, not pre-written with truth or error, but open. A soft silence, not yet shaped, and into that silence comes the world. One sight, one sound, one touch at a time. This was his radical thought, that knowledge begins not in heaven, but in experience, that to know is first to live. He was born in England, in a time when ideas were tightly guarded and questions could become crimes. Yet he questioned anyway, not with fire, but with patience, with the quiet discipline of someone who believes that clarity is not a luxury, but a right. He studied medicine, but also politics, philosophy, psychology. To him, they were not separate. They were all part of one task, understanding the human being, not just what it is, but what it can become. Locke saw that the old ways, those that spoke of inherited truths and rigid hierarchies, were crumbling. And he wanted to build something new, not out of power, but out of reason, not imposed, but discovered. He looked at the mind not as a vessel to be filled, but as a landscape to be explored. And what he saw changed everything. He called it the tabula rasa, the blank slate. And though others resisted, preferring to believe in fixed natures and preordained truths, Locke gently insisted, we become through what we experience. We are shaped by what we see, what we feel, what we choose. This idea, the mind is open as changing, wasn't just theory. It was an invitation. If we are not born with chains in our thoughts, then perhaps we are not born to wear chains in life. If we are shaped, then we can reshape. If truth is not inherited, then it must be sought by each of us, patiently, earnestly, together. He believed that truth begins with the senses, that we touch the world before we understand it, that we hear, see, taste, and through those small sensations, build vast ideas. There are no shortcuts to knowledge, only observation, reflection, and reason. But Locke was not just thinking about knowledge, he was thinking about freedom. In a time when kings ruled by divine right and subjects were taught to obey without question, Locke offered a new vision. A person, he said, is not the property of the crown, nor of the church, nor of tradition. Each person is their own. Each person holds within them certain rights, not granted by rulers, but born with them. Life, liberty, property. These were not privileges, they were foundations. He imagined government not as a master, but as a servant. Its role was not to dominate, but to protect, to create the space where individuals could think, speak, learn, live. And if a government failed in that task, if it broke the trust, it could be changed. This was not revolution for its own sake. It was the logic of dignity. His words moved quietly at first, but over time, they found their way into the hearts of revolutions, into the ink of declarations, into the rhythm of new nations seeking freedom. His thoughts helped shape the modern world, not with war, but with clarity. And yet, Locke himself lived with care. He suffered illness, lived in exile, moved through political storms, but he continued to write, continued to believe, not in perfect systems, but in the power of reason to move us closer to justice, closer to understanding, closer to each other. He believed that the mind could be cultivated like a garden, that education was not about obedience, but awakening, that children were not to be forced, but guided, that the soul did not need to be broken in order to be shaped. Tonight, if your mind feels tired, if you carry the weight of too many ideas, too many voices, perhaps Locke can sit with you. He does not bring commandments, only calm, only the invitation to begin again, to listen to your own experience, to trust what you observe, to let go of the noise and return to the gentle act of noticing. You are not fixed. You are not finished. You are becoming. Close your eyes. Let the blank page return. Not because you have nothing inside, but because you are free to write what comes next. You are not bound by the past. You are not a prisoner of thought. You are a quiet witness, a seeker, and everything you've lived has brought you here, to this stillness. Sleep now, thoughtful wanderer. You are not alone in your questions. You are part of a long lineage of minds, each learning to see more clearly. And John Locke, gentle, deliberate, steady, walks among them still. Good night, philosopher of the blank slate. In your calm, the world found a new way to think, and in your words, the soul remembers its right to begin again. He had a soft smile and a sharper mind, a heart that leaned toward kindness, and a mind that questioned everything. David Hume, born in the chill of Edinburgh's winds, grew into one of the quietest yet most unsettling voices in all of philosophy. He did not scream his doubts. He whispered them, gently, clearly, until the ground beneath your beliefs began to shift. He was not out to destroy truth, but he was devoted to understanding what truth really meant, how we came to believe the things we believed, and what right we had to be so certain. And in that devotion, he became both a mirror and a mystery. A mirror that reflected the fragility of our assumptions, and a mystery because, though he stripped away so much, what remained was still deeply, beautifully human. Hume did not believe in castles of thought built high into the sky. He looked closer to the ground, to where people actually lived. He watched how the mind worked, how we come to expect that the sun will rise, that the apple will fall, that the world will be tomorrow what it is today. And then he asked, almost playfully, how do we really know that? The answer, he found, was that we don't. Not with certainty. We assume, we believe, we grow familiar with patterns. But beneath those patterns is not a law carved into the universe, but a habit of the mind. We see two things happen together, like fire and heat, or cloud and rain, and we start to expect one after the other. This expectation feels like knowledge, but it isn't proof. It's just trust. Trust in the repetition of the world. And so Hume exposed what he called the problem of induction, that we expect the future to resemble the past, even though we cannot prove that it will. This sounds small, but it cuts to the root of science, of faith, of everyday life. We live by patterns. But Hume reminded us, patterns are not guarantees. Still, he did not fall into despair. He was not a cynic. In fact, he was warm, even cheerful. He loved dinners with friends, laughter, long walks. He believed that, though reason was limited, feeling and experience could still guide us well. That being human was not about building perfect systems, but learning to live gracefully with uncertainty. He turned his attention to the self and found something strange there too. When he looked inside for a solid I, a core identity, he found only a bundle of impressions, thoughts, memories, sensations, coming and going like waves. No permanent self, no unchanging center, just experience flowing through time. And yet, this did not frighten him. To Hume, this was liberation. We are not frozen identities, not eternal statues. We are rivers, alive, changing, held together not by essence, but by memory, feeling, story. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's beautiful. He also questioned religion, not cruelly, but carefully. He asked, if we believe in miracles, what is more likely, that nature changed its course or that someone was mistaken? He asked whether belief in God comes from evidence or from hope or from tradition. And his questions made many uncomfortable. But he did not ask them to destroy belief. He asked them because he believed that clarity matters. That truth, even when fragile, is still worthy. Hume believed morality, too, came not from divine command or cold reason, but from emotion, from the deep sense of sympathy we feel for others. We are, he said, creatures of feeling, and our ethics are not carved in the sky. They grow in the warmth between hearts. In all this, Hume was not trying to tear the world down. He was trying to show that the world we live in, the world of habits, hopes, laughter, and love, is already enough. That even without certainty, life can be rich. That even without final answers, kindness still matters. He lived simply, wrote tirelessly, published works that were ignored in his youth and revered after his death. And when the end came, he faced it as he faced everything else, with calm. He wrote letters, joked with friends, and welcomed death like an old question he no longer feared. Tonight, if your mind feels full of doubts about yourself, about the future, about what is real, Hume's spirit drifts gently toward you. He does not offer dogma, only a soft voice reminding you that it's okay not to know, that you don't have to be certain to be whole, that you don't need perfect answers to live an honest, thoughtful human life. Close your eyes now. Feel the breath come and go. You are not a fixed point. You are a dance of experience, a flame flickering through time. And that too is beautiful. Sleep then. Not with all the answers, but with enough wonder to carry you to morning. Good night, David Hume. You doubted so that we could live more clearly. And in your questions, we found a gentler truth. He walked the same streets every day, at the same hour, with such precision that neighbors could set their clocks by his steps. Immanuel Kant lived a life of routine, of order, of stillness. And from that quiet corner of Königsberg, a town he never left, he shook the entire world of philosophy. Not with thunder, not with revolution, but with thoughts so deep, so carefully structured, that it redefined how we understand reality itself. Kant was not seeking to be admired. He was seeking to understand. And what he wanted to understand more than anything was this: how do we know what we know? For centuries, philosophers had wrestled with this question. Some believed knowledge came only from reason. Others said it came only from experience. Kant listened to them all. And then, like a craftsman carving something entirely new, he offered a third way. He asked a question so quiet, so foundational, that it still echoes today. What if the mind doesn't just receive the world? What if it shapes it? To Kant, the mind was not a passive mirror. It was an active architect. We do not see the world as it is. We see it through the lens of our perception. Space, time, cause and effect, these aren't simply out there. They are part of how our minds make sense of what is out there. Imagine wearing a pair of invisible glasses. Not ones you can take off, but ones you were born with. These glasses shape everything you see, every object, every event, every idea. That, to Kant, is what it means to be human. To live not in the raw world, but in the world as it is filtered through the human mind. He called this the Copernican revolution in philosophy. Just as Copernicus had shown that the Earth revolved around the sun, not the other way around, Kant suggested that the object conforms to the subject, not the subject to the object. It was a profound shift. The world as we know it isn't just discovered, it's constructed. But Kant didn't stop there. He turned his attention inward toward morality, toward the deep sense of duty, of right and wrong that stirs within us like a quiet compass. He believed that true morality doesn't come from consequences. It doesn't come from fear or reward. It comes from within, from the recognition that every human being has dignity, not because of what they can do, but because of what they are, an end in themselves. He called this the categorical imperative. Act only according to that principle which you would will to become a universal law. In other words, act in a way that you would be okay with everyone else acting, always. Not because you'll benefit, not because you'll be punished if you don't, but because it's right. To Kant, freedom wasn't doing whatever you please. It was living in accordance with reason, with principle, with a sense of moral law that lives not in books, but in the quiet certainty of the soul. And yet he was no stern preacher. He was gentle, private, precise. He loved the natural sciences, read widely, admired beauty. He once said that there are two things which fill the mind with wonder: the starry sky above and the moral law within. Between those two, he believed, we find our place. He lived modestly. He rarely traveled. He had a few close friends and spent most of his days teaching, writing, and walking. His most famous book, Critique of Pure Reason, was not easy. It is dense, intricate, demanding, but it came from a desire not to impress, but to be true, to build, piece by piece, a philosophy that could hold. Tonight, if your thoughts feel scattered, if the world seems too vast or too unknowable, Kant offers a quiet reassurance. You do not need to understand everything outside. You only need to understand the light through which you see. You are not separate from meaning. You are part of how meaning is made. And your moral sense, your feeling of rightness, of fairness, of duty, it is not weakness. It is the echo of something timeless. A law not written in stone, but written in the structure of your mind. Close your eyes. Let the stars return. Let the soft machinery of your thoughts settle. You are not lost in the world. You are shaping it, even now, with each thought, with each act of care. Sleep now, silent architect. In your stillness, you built a world that lives inside all of us. Good night, Immanuel Kant. You taught us that even the smallest moment, lived with principle, holds infinite weight. Not all philosophers come to comfort. Some arrive as storms, quiet but immense, dark but strangely clear. Arthur Schopenhauer was one such storm. He did not wear the smile of easy answers. He did not wrap life in warm reassurance. Instead, he held up a mirror, polished by suffering, and asked us to look deeply into what we often try to ignore. Born in Danzig, raised among wealth, Schopenhauer seemed destined for comfort. But his soul tilted elsewhere. From a young age, he sensed that the world was not as bright as others claimed. Behind polite conversations and painted smiles, he saw struggle, and he was unafraid to name it. To him, life was not a smooth path toward happiness. It was a tension, a yearning, a hunger that never ends. Not because we are broken, but because we are willed into wanting. This will, he said, is the force behind everything. Not a divine will, not a conscious plan, but a blind, restless striving, a push to exist, to become, to desire. Look at nature, he would say. At the tree reaching for light, the animal chasing prey, the human chasing dreams. Beneath it all, the same current flows, the will to live. And with it comes suffering, because the will is never satisfied. The moment a desire is fulfilled, another arises. We live in pursuit, in absence, in hunger. And yet Schopenhauer was not cold. His darkness was not cruelty. It was honesty. He did not believe in running from pain or covering it with distractions. He believed in seeing it fully, with eyes wide open, because only by seeing it can we begin to understand where freedom might lie. He believed art, especially music, was one such escape. In music, he said, we glimpse the will itself, stripped of image or word. It vibrates directly with the soul. And in that resonance, there is a kind of release, a moment when we are no longer striving, but simply being. He also saw beauty in compassion. For if we all suffer, if suffering is the thread that runs through all life, then to recognize that suffering in others is to recognize something in ourselves. Compassion, for Schopenhauer, was not a virtue of the naive. It was the deepest, most honest connection between beings. He lived alone, by choice. He distrusted the crowds, the noise, the false promises of society. He wrote with clarity, with fire, with fury. And for a long time, the world did not listen. His works were overlooked. His ideas seemed too bleak for a culture obsessed with progress. But time passed, and slowly, his voice began to echo in new ears. Artists, writers, composers, many found in his words a strange comfort, a truth too raw to ignore. Nietzsche read him, Wagner adored him, Tolstoy listened, Freud traced his ideas into the unconscious. Schopenhauer did not tell us how to be happy. He told us how to endure, how to strip away illusions, how to look at the world without flinching, and still find moments of peace, of gentleness, of clarity. He believed in asceticism, in turning away from constant craving, not as denial, but as liberation. To say no, not out of fear, but out of freedom. To step back from the wheel of wanting and rest in stillness. And still, he loved animals. He kept a small dog named Atma, Sanskrit for soul, and spoke often of the intelligence and purity of animals. In them, he saw life unmasked. In their eyes, the same will, but without hypocrisy. He aged quietly, walking the same streets, reading the same books, writing with the same force. And when death came, it did not surprise him, for he had stared it in the face every day of his life and learned not to fear it. To him, death was not the end. It was the gentle silence that follows the noise of striving, a return, a stillness. Tonight, if your heart feels heavy, if the world seems too loud, too demanding, too false, Schopenhauer does not offer easy hope, but he does offer truth. He sits with you, not to cheer you up, but to remind you that it's okay to see the shadows, that your sorrow is not a flaw, it is part of being awake. Let the desires fall away now. Let the world go quiet. You are not here to win. You are not here to conquer. You are here to witness, to feel, to endure. And in that quiet endurance, there is a kind of dignity no joy can match. Sleep now, not to escape life, but to rest from its ceaseless call. You are not wrong for feeling what you feel. You are simply human. And that, even in its sadness, is beautiful. Good night, Arthur Schopenhauer. In your darkness, we found a deeper kind of light, one that doesn't blind, but reveals. He walked alone, through the rainy streets of Copenhagen, beneath low skies and heavier thoughts. Søren Kierkegaard drifted like a soul too awake in a world still asleep. He was not a philosopher of grand systems or neat categories. He was a trembling voice in the night, asking not, what is truth, but what does it mean to live? To live fully, not in theory, but in trembling. In decision, in faith. He wrote in fragments, under many names, many masks, as if no single voice could capture the full shape of the questions burning within him. Sometimes sharp, sometimes tender, sometimes ironic. His writing danced between tones, but always circled the same ache, the inwardness of the human soul. Its loneliness, its fear, its hunger for meaning. Kierkegaard was born into wealth, into melancholy, into a family shadowed by death. By the time he was 25, most of his siblings were gone. His father, a stern man with deep guilt and deeper faith, passed down both his sorrow and his God. Søren inherited it all, the intellect, the sadness, the fire. And then came Regine. She was young, bright, full of life. He loved her deeply, proposed. She said yes. But something inside him recoiled, not from her, but from the idea of happiness, of comfort. He feared it would tame him, soften him, pull him away from his calling. So he broke the engagement. She never stopped loving him. And he never stopped writing about her, though never by name. Regine became a symbol in his work, a symbol of the choice that must be made between the aesthetic life and the ethical life, between beauty and truth, between escape and responsibility, because that was Kierkegaard's obsession, choice. He believed that to be human is not to think, but to choose, not to drift through life, but to leap, not with certainty, but with faith. Because the most important decisions, the ones that shape your very being, cannot be made with guarantees. They demand something more terrifying, commitment. He called it the leap of faith. Not belief in something irrational, but trust in something beyond the grasp of reason. A leap across the abyss of uncertainty. A leap that must be made alone. He saw that modern life was turning people into spectators, detached, comfortable, entertained. But he wanted something deeper. A life lived from the inside out. A life that asks, who am I when no one is watching? What do I stand for when there is no applause? His critique was not of science or progress, but of a life without depth, a life without existential risk, without inward struggle. He saw people hiding in social roles, in cleverness, in distraction, and he urged them gently, then fiercely, to wake up. To become a self, he said, is not automatic. It is an act, a task, a battle. And despair is the sickness of the soul that forgets this battle, that settles for comfort, that avoids the pain of becoming. He described despair not just as sadness, but as the refusal to be oneself, as the soul's quiet betrayal of its own possibility. And yet, beneath the weight of his thought, there was tenderness, humor, grace. He knew that no one becomes whole overnight, that fear and trembling are part of the journey. He saw the Christian story not as dogma, but as paradox, as the meeting point of the infinite and the finite, the eternal and the moment. God made man not to explain life, but to meet us in our unknowing. Kierkegaard never sought fame. He spent his days walking, writing, pacing alone in the flicker of candlelight. His city did not understand him. Critics mocked him. Even theologians turned away. But he kept writing, not for applause, but for the single individual. For the one reader who, in the dead of night, might need to hear. You are not alone in your anguish. Your struggle matters. Your leap is sacred. When he died at just 42, few noticed, but his words lingered, soft and urgent. And over time, they found new voices. Existentialists would call him their father. Theologians would rediscover his depth. Poets and seekers would quote him, feel him, thank him. Tonight, if you feel torn between what is safe and what is true, between what is known and what is calling, Kierkegaard walks beside you, not to solve your fear, but to honor it. To tell you that the trembling is not a weakness. It is the sign that you are alive. Let yourself feel the weight of being, the quiet ache of your own soul. You don't need to have the answers. You don't need to see the other side. You need only to stand at the edge and breathe. The leap, if it comes, will come from within, and it will not be made with certainty, but with courage. Sleep now, gentle rebel of the soul. In your solitude, you made a way for others to find themselves, and in your trembling, we learned how to become. Good night, Søren Kierkegaard. The leap remains, the inward path still calls, and your voice still whispers, softly, through the dark. He was born with a storm in his chest, not the quiet kind, not the whisper of doubt or the ache of yearning, but the kind that rolls through cities and cracks open the sky. Karl Marx was not a philosopher who lingered in libraries, content to speculate on the nature of thought. No, he wanted to set thought on fire, to drag philosophy out of the clouds and anchor it to hunger, to labor, to blood. He looked at the world and saw a wound shaped like a factory, like a coal mine, like a child's hand blistered before it had learned to write. And he asked, not what truth is in the abstract, but who gets to live, and who is made to suffer so others can. Born in Trier, in what is now Germany, Marx grew up in a time of change, but also silence. The Industrial Revolution had begun to reshape the earth, but beneath its engines of progress, something darker churned. The poor grew poorer, their backs bent beneath chimneys and profit margins, the cities filled with smoke and promises. And yet, so many turned their eyes away. Marx did not. He believed philosophy had spent too long describing the world. He wanted to change it. And change, for him, began with seeing the structure, the deep, hidden machinery of society. Not the surface politics, not the passing laws, but the invisible gears that turned behind them. Class, labor, capital. At the heart of Marx's thought was the idea of struggle. That history itself is not a peaceful drift toward improvement, but a battlefield, a constant tension between those who own and those who toil, between the bourgeoisie, who controlled the means of production, and the proletariat, who sold their time, their strength, their lives for survival. To Marx, capitalism was not just an economic system. It was a system of relationships, of alienation, where the worker no longer saw themselves in what they created, but became a stranger to it, where people became tools, their value measured in output and cost, where a person could work every hour of the day and still be poor. He called for revolution, not as a cry of destruction, but as a call to reimagine the foundation of life, a call for dignity, for a world where labor was not a chain, but a form of expression, where people were not cogs, but creators. With Friedrich Engels, he wrote the Communist Manifesto, a text short in length, but vast in impact. It began with a sentence like a drumbeat. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. And from that moment, his voice would never vanish. He lived most of his life in exile, moving between countries, hunted by governments, ignored by the wealthy, embraced by the poor. He lived often in poverty, buried two of his children, watched others die around him. Not in theory, but in reality. Hunger was not metaphor for Marx. It was memory. He worked tirelessly on Das Kapital, the book he believed would expose the inner workings of capitalism, not just its face, but its bones. The pages were dense, mathematical, sharp, but they pulsed with a single question. What kind of world do we build when profit matters more than people? And yet, Marx was not without hope. He believed in the capacity of the collective, in the possibility of solidarity, in the idea that consciousness could awaken, and with it, a new kind of freedom, not the freedom to buy, but the freedom to live without chains. His critics feared him, misread him, used his name to justify violence he never called for. But the real Marx, buried beneath ideologies and revolutions and statues, was a man of thought and thunder. A man who wept, who loved, who believed, not in utopia, but in justice. In the dignity of bread earned without exploitation. In the right of every person to be more than a number. He died before seeing his ideas bloom or burn, before hearing his name shouted in protests or painted on walls or silenced in censorship. He died with work unfinished. But he died knowing he had named something no one else dared to. Tonight, if you feel restless, if you feel like the world moves too fast and leaves too many behind, Marx sits with you, not to soothe, but to ignite, to remind you that systems are made by people and can be unmade by people, that power does not fall, it is taken, that justice does not arrive, it is built. Let the machines go silent now, let the noise fade. You are not just labor, you are not just a role, you are a voice, a mind, a fire waiting to speak. Sleep now, Karl Marx. The world is still turning, still burning, still remembering what you taught it to see. And beneath the concrete, the factories, the weight of the hours, your question still lingers. Who benefits and who suffers? Good night, comrade of the voiceless. Your words made the ground tremble, and the trembling continues still. He wrote with thunder in his veins. His pen moved like lightning across the page, not to illuminate gently, but to shatter, to split, to burn. Friedrich Nietzsche was not a thinker who walked beside others. He strode alone, far ahead, into the icy winds of truth, where most fear to go. And in that solitude, he forged something wild, something defiant, something unforgettable. Nietzsche was born in Rücken, a small village in Germany, the son of a Lutheran pastor. He grew up surrounded by faith, silence, and sorrow. His father died when he was just 5. That loss marked him, not only with grief, but with a growing suspicion that the world wasn't what it claimed to be. He was a brilliant student, steeped in ancient Greek, in music, in poetry, in philosophy. He became the youngest ever appointed professor of philology at Basel University at just 24. But academia was too quiet for him, too safe. He was not made for the lecture hall. He was made for the abyss. And it was the abyss he looked into, again and again. Nietzsche declared with a whisper that felt like a scream, God is dead. Not to mock belief, not to celebrate atheism, but to name a wound in the soul of the West. He saw that faith, once central to life, had begun to crumble under science, reason, modernity. And yet, no one spoke of it. People lived as if God still watched, while beneath them, the foundation was gone. He did not say this with joy. He said it with dread. Because when the old gods die, the meaning they carried dies with them. And into that vacuum rushes despair, or worse, numbness. Nietzsche asked, what happens to a civilization when it forgets how to believe? He saw danger not in doubt, but in comfort, in the mediocrity of those who refuse to ask deep questions, in the herd mentality, where people follow the crowd, avoiding pain, avoiding greatness. He longed for something more, a new kind of human, one who could dance on the edge of chaos without falling. He called this the Übermensch, the overman, the one who creates values from within, who does not borrow meaning but invents it, who lives not by obedience but by affirmation. Not a tyrant, not a monster, but someone whose very existence is a work of art. And this overman, Nietzsche said, could only rise through the trial of eternal recurrence, the idea that every moment, every joy, every pain must be lived again and again, endlessly. If you had to live your life over, exactly as it is, would you say yes? Would you embrace it? That is the test. Not to flee suffering, but to bless it, to look it in the eye and say, I will this. He loved the body, the senses, the earth. He distrusted any philosophy that denied life in favor of abstract heavens. He believed in the will to power, not as domination of others, but as the inner force that drives creation, transformation, the raw push to become more. His writing is unlike any other, sharp, lyrical, fierce, aphorisms that cut like knives, parables that sound like myths. He did not argue, he sang. And in his song, there is both madness and music. He walked alone for most of his life. He suffered intense migraines, illness, isolation. He fell in love with a woman who never loved him back. He broke from friends, from colleagues, from the world. His books sold poorly. He moved from town to town, always chasing health, always writing. And then, in 1889, he collapsed on the streets of Turin. After watching a horse being beaten, he threw his arms around it, weeping. His mind shattered. The brilliance that once cut through all illusion now dimmed, and he would live the last years of his life in silence, cared for by his sister. But the words he left behind did not sleep. They rose, slowly, then suddenly. Decades later, his voice would be heard everywhere, from art to psychology to political theory, misused, misquoted, misunderstood, but always present. Because once Nietzsche enters the soul, he never truly leaves. He did not offer comfort. He offered fire, a fire to burn away illusions, to melt cowardice, to forge something fierce and real. He asked you to face yourself, not the version you show the world, but the one you hide. He asked you to become who you are. Tonight, if you feel lost in a world of noise, Nietzsche walks beside you, not to guide, but to provoke, to awaken, to whisper, what if this moment returned again and again? Would you bless it or curse it? He does not ask you to follow. He asks you to dance, to write your life in bold strokes, to love fate, even its cruelty, to look at pain and say, this too is mine. Let your mind breathe now. Let the silence come, not the silence of defeat, but the silence before creation. You are not here to conform. You are here to become. Sleep now, wild spirit. In your flame, we saw the shadows more clearly. And in your loneliness, we found the courage to walk alone. Good night, Friedrich Nietzsche. You did not offer peace, but you lit the way toward truth that dares to burn. He was not a builder of towering systems or a preacher of cosmic truths. William James came to philosophy like one might enter a quiet room after a storm, curious, tired, tender. He believed not in imposing answers, but in listening deeply to the way life actually feels. And from that simple, profound attentiveness, he became one of the most beloved thinkers America ever produced. James was born into a world of privilege, yet he was never at peace. The son of a wealthy intellectual family, older brother to the novelist Henry James, he was surrounded by brilliance from the start, but also by a quiet kind of torment. He struggled with depression, with questions of meaning, with the sense that life might be hollow at its core. And yet he did not run. He looked into that darkness and asked, softly, what keeps us going? His path to philosophy was indirect. He studied art, then science, then medicine. He taught psychology before it was even considered its own field. He was fascinated by the mind, not just its structure, but its fluidity, its subjectivity, its deeply human textures. To James, truth wasn't something frozen in stone. It was something lived. He is often called the father of pragmatism, but that word, like most labels, fails to capture his warmth. For James, pragmatism wasn't cold calculation. It was the simple idea that ideas should be judged not by how elegant they are, but by what they do. If a belief helps you live better, connect deeper, act more fully, then it holds a kind of truth. And that truth doesn't need to be eternal. It needs to be useful, lived, real. Not real in the sense of measurable facts, but real in the landscape of the human soul, where emotions matter, where suffering speaks, where choice ripples out into meaning. James believed in free will, not as a logical deduction, but as a moral act. He once wrote, "My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will," because that choice, the choice to believe that we can choose, was for him the beginning of all hope. Without it, everything collapses into passivity. With it, we become responsible for our own becoming. He spoke often of the will to believe, not blind faith, but a kind of courageous trust, a willingness to act even when certainty is absent, a leap not into dogma, but into possibility. When the evidence is incomplete and the stakes are humanly profound, James argued, we are justified in choosing belief, not because it's proven, but because it's needed. He applied this not only to religion, but to every corner of life. He saw philosophy not as speculation, but as therapy for the soul. Not as abstraction, but as a tool for navigating doubt, fear, hope, grief. He loved the pluralism of experience, the messiness, the contradictions. He rejected systems that tried to flatten reality into one shape. Life, to him, was made of many truths, many streams, many moods, and our task was not to conquer them, but to honor them. He listened to mystics. He studied religious experiences, not to confirm or deny their content, but to understand their power. In his landmark book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, he explored how faith takes root in people's lives, not in creeds, but in longings, in awakenings, and transformations. He respected belief even when he didn't share it, because he knew it carried meaning. And behind all of it was a man who knew suffering, a man who fought despair, a man who wrote not to dazzle, but to reach. His words never shouted, they invited, they asked gently, "What works for you? What brings you alive? What makes you stronger in the face of life's weight?" William James never tried to be a prophet. He was more like a friend sitting beside you in the dark, not pretending to have the answers, but helping you ask better questions. And through that, you begin to feel a little less alone. He believed life was uncertain, but not meaningless. He believed pain was real, but not final. He believed truth was evolving, personal, woven into time. And he believed, perhaps most radically of all, that philosophy could be kind. Tonight, if you are wrestling with choices, if you feel the fog of indecision or the ache of doubt, William James leans in, not to pressure you, but to remind you. You are allowed to choose, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You don't need to be sure. You only need to be sincere. You are not a machine. You are not a logic puzzle. You are a living being, trembling forward through time, carrying dreams and memories and fears, and all of that is worthy of consideration. All of that matters. Let the noise settle. Let the rush fall away. Here, in this quiet, you can begin again, not with certainty, but with care. Sleep now, gentle explorer of the mind. You showed us that thought can be soft, that belief can be brave, that the soul, even when tired, still seeks the light. Good night, William James. You did not shout, but your whisper still echoes, guiding us gently toward whatever truth we are ready to carry. He stood tall among the chaos of the 20th century, not with clenched fists, but with a clear mind. Bertrand Russell didn't need to shout. His words, sharp as glass and calm as water, cut through confusion with a rare precision. He believed that reason could be a compass, even in a storm. That clarity was not cold, but courageous. And that philosophy, when done honestly, was not about answers, but about learning how to live without lies. Born into an aristocratic English family, Russell's early life was marked by both privilege and tragedy. Orphaned young, raised by his strict and deeply religious grandmother, he found solace not in faith, but in numbers. Mathematics became his first refuge. The clean lines, the solid logic, it gave him something he could trust. But the older he grew, the more he began to ask, if we can be so certain in mathematics, why is human life so full of contradictions? Why do nations kill? Why does love falter? Why does suffering persist, even in the presence of knowledge? So he turned to philosophy, not as an escape from the world, but as a deeper engagement with it. He believed that thinking clearly was a moral act, that confusion, when left unchallenged, leads to cruelty, that beliefs, if not tested, can harden into weapons. Russell's early work tried to bring mathematical rigor to philosophical problems. With Alfred North Whitehead, he wrote Principia Mathematica, a vast and daunting work that sought to reduce all of math to pure logic. The effort nearly broke him, but it also revealed something deeper, the limits of certainty. Even in the most precise systems, paradox lingered. Doubt was never far behind, and Russell embraced that doubt. Unlike many philosophers before him, he didn't hide behind abstraction. He confronted the world as it was, messy, violent, absurd. He opposed war. He was imprisoned for speaking out against World War I. He championed peace during the nuclear age, co-authoring the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, warning of the dangers of atomic weapons. In an era of ideological extremes, he stood for the quiet strength of skepticism. He questioned everything: religion, empire, capitalism, communism, even philosophy itself. Not out of cynicism, but because he cared deeply. He once said, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts." That sentence alone captures the spirit of his life. He believed in freedom, not just political freedom, but intellectual freedom. The freedom to ask dangerous questions, to think independently, to admit when you're wrong, to change your mind. For Russell, a good life was not one filled with answers, but one driven by curiosity, compassion, and the willingness to follow truth wherever it might lead. He also believed in love. Despite heartbreaks and tangled relationships, he returned again and again to the idea that affection and kindness are at the heart of what makes life worth living. "Love is wise, hatred is foolish," he said in one of his final interviews. A simple sentence, but behind it, a century of thought, loss, resistance, and learning. Russell wrote constantly: books, essays, letters, declarations. His prose was clear, unadorned, unafraid. He wanted to be understood, not revered. He believed that philosophy had failed too often by becoming a private language. He wanted to speak plainly, and he did. Whether writing about metaphysics, politics, or human desire, he made the complex feel navigable. He was not without controversy. His views on religion, war, sex, and society scandalized many. He lost teaching positions, made enemies, stirred public debate. But through it all, he remained unwavering in one thing: the belief that ideas matter, that how we think shapes how we live, that a mind is not something to be trained into obedience, but awakened into wonder. And in the final years of his life, well into his 90s, he did not retreat. He kept writing, kept protesting, kept encouraging younger generations to question, to doubt, to dream of a gentler world. Tonight, if your mind is heavy, if the noise of the world feels too loud, if certainty feels like a mask too many are wearing, Bertrand Russell leans near. He doesn't give you the answer, but he reminds you that asking is noble, that doubt is not weakness, that calm, thoughtful reasoning is itself a kind of quiet rebellion. He believed that philosophy begins not in certainty, but in wonder, that the best kind of thinking is not rigid, but playful, curious, open, that we are, all of us, walking through a fog, and the only way through is to think with honesty and to love without shame. Let your thoughts slow now. Let the silence return. You do not need to know everything. You only need to be willing to look, to ask, to care. Sleep now, Bertrand Russell. You lived not to command, but to illuminate, not to conquer minds, but to free them. And your words, calm, careful, clear, still light the way for those of us who, even in the dark, are trying to think our way towards something true. Good night, voice of reason. You taught us that even in an uncertain world, clarity can be an act of love. He was born into one of the wealthiest families in Vienna, but carried a kind of hunger no fortune could ever quiet. Ludwig Wittgenstein lived not for comfort, nor fame, nor even knowledge, but for truth stripped bare, raw and trembling. And he searched for it where most never think to look, in the words we speak, in the silence they conceal, in the hidden shape of our thought. He was not easy, not to read, not to love, not even to be. His presence burned, intense, restless, uncompromising. He demanded everything from philosophy and even more from himself. To him, ideas were not just arguments. They were life. They were soul. They were the pulse beneath everything we say and do. He began in logic, trained under Bertrand Russell at Cambridge, where his brilliance was immediately clear and immediately strange. His thinking was unlike anything his teachers had seen. He seemed haunted by the problem of language, not merely what words mean, but how they mean, how language builds the very frame of our understanding. And so, during the chaos of World War I, in the solitude of the trenches, he wrote a slim, cryptic book that would reshape philosophy, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. In it, he offered a vision both breathtaking and cold. The world, he said, is made up of facts, not things. And language maps those facts. It pictures reality, like a mirror held up to the world, but only up to a point. At the end of that book, he wrote a sentence that lingers like a ghost: whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. It was not a declaration of defeat, it was reverence, a bow before the mystery that lies beyond language, beyond logic, beyond the sayable. And then he disappeared. Having written what he believed was the final word on philosophy, Wittgenstein left it all behind. He gave away his inheritance. He worked as a school teacher in remote Austrian villages. He lived in a cabin in the woods. He dug ditches. He vanished into obscurity, trying to live simply, honestly, even painfully. But philosophy was not done with him. Years later, he returned, older, quieter, changed. And this time, his thinking had shifted. The rigid clarity of the Tractatus gave way to something softer, more human. He no longer believed that language was a perfect mirror of the world. Now he saw it as something far more alive, a tool, a game, a dance of meaning shaped by how we live, not just how we think. In his later work, most famously in Philosophical Investigations, he dismantled the very idea that words have fixed meanings. Instead, he pointed to use. Words mean what we do with them. Meaning lives in the context, in the act, in the life around the sentence. He spoke of language games, ways in which words operate differently, depending on the setting, the purpose, the culture. And through this insight, he exposed how many philosophical problems arise not from the world itself, but from the misuse of language. We become tangled in our own words, like someone caught in a net they cast themselves. His later philosophy is not an attempt to build a system. It is a process of untangling, of looking carefully, patiently, humbly at how we speak, how we think, how we misunderstand ourselves and each other. It is not easy reading, but it is full of strange comfort, because beneath the analysis, there is mercy, a sense that confusion is not failure, it is simply part of being human. Wittgenstein never chased fame. He feared it. He distrusted easy answers, cleverness, applause. He demanded an honesty from himself so severe it often brought him anguish. He questioned whether he was good enough, whether he deserved to speak, whether anything he said could truly matter. And yet he kept writing, quietly, urgently, as if something inside him would shatter if he didn't. He left behind very little published work. Most of his writings were notebooks, remarks, fragments, thoughts not polished but alive, thoughts that invite you not to agree but to look closer, to slow down, to see again. Tonight, if your mind feels lost in language, if words seem too slippery, too shallow, too sharp, Wittgenstein is near. He does not offer answers. He offers attention. He does not ask you to master anything, only to observe, to listen to how you speak, to notice what hides in the pauses, to honor the silence. He believed that philosophy was not a doctrine, but a therapy, a way of clearing confusion, not with grand theories, but with care, a way of healing the mind by showing it the paths it wandered down unknowingly. He lived simply, died quietly. And yet, his legacy stretches through every corner of philosophy today. Logic, language, mind, meaning, none of these are the same after him. Let your thoughts soften now. Let the need for answers fall away. There is something holy in the silence, in the quiet between words, in the space where language ends and being begins. Sleep now, Ludwig Wittgenstein. You taught us not how to speak louder, but how to speak more truthfully, and when not to speak at all. And in the hush of night, when the world is quiet enough, your voice still lingers. Not as a lecture, but as a whisper. Pay attention. Nothing is too small to matter. Good night, philosopher of silence. You showed us that even in a world built on words, the deepest truths may live beyond them. He sat in cafes, smoke curling around him, a typewriter humming with restless thoughts, and the world outside never quite silent. Jean-Paul Sartre did not seek to escape life. He wanted to confront it, all of it. The mess, the absurdity, the beauty, the responsibility. His philosophy was not a retreat from the street, from the crowd, from the violence of history. It was born from it. He did not ask what it means to live well. He asked what it means to exist at all. To read Sartre is to feel a mirror turned toward your own face. Not gently, not romantically, but honestly, relentlessly. Who are you? What have you chosen? What are you running from? He doesn't answer for you. He waits, quietly, and the silence begins to press. He was born in Paris, a child of intellect, early orphaned by his father's death, and raised under the influence of books, ideas, language. He read voraciously. He questioned everything. And as the 20th century unfolded in all its turmoil, he emerged not just as a philosopher, but as a witness, a participant, a voice in the storm. What Sartre gave the world was not comfort, it was freedom, and with it, the unbearable weight that freedom brings. He declared that existence precedes essence. It's a simple phrase, but it rearranges everything. It means we are not born with a built-in purpose. There is no blueprint, no divine script, no destiny carved in stone. We appear in the world first, raw, unfinished, and only later, through our choices, do we become something. And so we are responsible, not just for what we do, but for what we are. That responsibility is terrifying. There are no excuses left. No, I was made this way. No, that's just how things are. Sartre tells us, you are what you do. Every action is a thread in the tapestry of who you are becoming. Even in not choosing, you choose. In this light, life is dizzying. There is no fixed meaning, only the meanings we create. We are thrown into a world we didn't ask for, with a freedom we didn't expect, and a need to construct ourselves from nothing. Sartre calls this anguish, not because life is cruel, but because it is open, vast, and we are the authors of ourselves, whether we like it or not. He explored these ideas not only through essays, but through plays, novels, and stories. Nausea, his first major work, is not a treatise, but a diary of disintegration. The world becomes strange, heavy, absurd. Objects lose their meaning. The very presence of things becomes oppressive. And yet, within that chaos, a question pulses. How do I live? In Being and Nothingness, his magnum opus, Sartre dives deeper into consciousness, freedom, and the illusions we build to avoid facing ourselves. He speaks of bad faith, the lies we tell ourselves to escape the truth of our freedom. When we pretend we are just a waiter, just a student, just a role, we are fleeing the vastness of who we could be. We are hiding from the responsibility of becoming. But Sartre never stops at the individual. For him, existence is not solitary. It is entangled with others. And here enters the gaze. When another person looks at us, we become aware of ourselves in a new way. We see ourselves as seen. This can be alienating, even oppressive. We become objects in someone else's world. But it also reveals something crucial, that identity is never entirely our own. This is the tension Sartre lived with, between absolute freedom and the unavoidable presence of others, between the self we build and the eyes that reflect us, between solitude and solidarity. And solidarity mattered deeply to him. During World War II, Sartre joined the resistance against Nazi occupation. He wrote, spoke, and acted in defiance of oppression. After the war, he remained politically engaged, sometimes controversially so. He supported Marxist movements, criticized colonialism, and refused the Nobel Prize in Literature, claiming that a writer must never become an institution. He wanted to stay free, and to fight for freedom, not just in thought, but in the world. There was always a tension in Sartre, between philosophy and politics, between clarity and chaos, between his fierce intellect and his deeply human contradictions. He loved, he doubted, he failed, he tried again. His partnership with Simone de Beauvoir was one of the most radical and enduring intellectual relationships of the 20th century, based not on possession, but on conversation, openness, challenge. Tonight, if you feel the weight of choices not yet made, if you wonder what to do, who to become, how to face the vast sky above you, Sartre does not offer a map. He offers a mirror. He reminds you, you are free. Even when it doesn't feel like it, even when the world is heavy, even when fear whispers that you are small. Freedom is not a gift, it is a condition, and it is yours. What you do with it, that is your answer to life. Let your mind soften now. Let the shadows stretch. The question is not whether life has meaning. The question is, will you give it meaning? Sleep now, Jean-Paul Sartre. You wrestled with existence, and in doing so, helped others face their own. You did not seek peace, but you gave courage, not certainty, but a fire. And in that quiet fire, many still find the strength to say, I choose. Even when the path is unclear, even when the burden is heavy, even when the world, absurd and aching, waits with no promises. Good night, philosopher of freedom. Your words still echo, not as comfort, but as call. She stood not in the shadow of any man, not even Sartre, though the world often tried to place her there. Simone de Beauvoir walked alongside him, but her steps carved their own path, bold and clear. Hers was not the philosophy of theory alone, but of embodiment, of lived experience, of asking, what does it truly mean to be a woman, to be human, to be free? Born into a bourgeois French family, she was told early what she was supposed to be: dutiful daughter, faithful wife, caretaker, companion. But Simone saw the boundaries. She saw the bars of expectation, even when they were dressed in silk and sweetened with politeness, and she refused to accept them as natural. She was brilliant from the beginning, a philosopher, a writer, a woman in classrooms filled with men. She read voraciously, wrote endlessly, thought tirelessly. But more than that, she watched. She watched how women were shaped, not just by law or tradition, but by language, by roles, by quiet dismissals and loud demands. And she knew that if she wanted to understand freedom, she would have to understand womanhood first. Her most powerful answer came in the form of a book that shook the world, The Second Sex. Published in 1949, it began with a question so simple it seemed impossible to ignore. What is a woman? And her answer was even more powerful. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. With those words, Simone exposed a truth long hidden in plain sight, that gender was not destiny, that femininity was not essence, that womanhood had been constructed, imposed, shaped by centuries of myths, norms, systems. She peeled back the layers of religion, biology, psychoanalysis, culture, and revealed how women had been turned into the other, not subject, but object, not self, but mirror. She did not write with bitterness. She wrote with clarity, with fire, with love, even love for the truth, for freedom, for those still waiting to be seen as full human beings. She argued that men had claimed the position of the universal, the neutral, the standard, and women had been pushed to the margins, made relative, dependent, secondary. And in exposing this, she did more than critique the world. She opened a door through which generations of feminists would walk. Holding torches, she helped light. But Simone was never just an idea. She lived fiercely. She loved Sartre, but refused to be possessed by him. Their relationship was legendary, not because it fit a model, but because it broke it. Open, intellectual, tangled, flawed, they chose each other again and again, even as they also chose freedom, and others, and the work that called them both. She once said, "I wanted everything from life. I wanted to live it all, to the full." And she did. She wrote novels, essays, memoirs. She traveled, protested, watched revolutions rise and fall. She sat in cafes and listened to the world breathe. She was not only a philosopher of gender, but of aging, of ethics, of politics, of death. She wrote The Mandarins, The Ethics of Ambiguity, A Very Easy Death. In each, her voice is precise and intimate, fierce and tender. She didn't want to lecture the world, she wanted to understand it. And in doing so, she invited others to understand themselves. Simone believed that freedom was not a gift, but a burden we must bear. That we are thrown into a world we did not choose, but within that world, we must choose who we will become. And more than that, she knew that freedom is never truly free unless it is shared. To will oneself free is also to will others free, she wrote. Liberation is a collective act. She understood the complexities of being a woman in a man's world, not just the external limits, but the internal ones, the shame, the self-doubt, the fear of stepping out of line. And she showed how those wounds were not natural, but learned. And if they could be learned, they could be unlearned. She did not pretend that becoming free was easy. She knew the cost, the loneliness, the backlash, the misunderstandings. But she never let those stop her. Her life was a testament to the idea that freedom is not comfort, it is courage. Tonight, if you are feeling the weight of being seen as less, of being boxed into a role you did not choose, Simone de Beauvoir leans near, not to soothe, but to awaken, not to tell you who you are, but to remind you that you decide. You are not secondary. You are not an echo. You are not made to fit into someone else's story. You are the author of your own. She would not want to be remembered as an icon, but as a woman who thought, who wrote, who dared to speak when silence was safer, who believed that every life mattered, not as an idea, but as a living truth. Let the night fall gently now. Let your breath slow. The world may try to name you, define you, limit you, but you are under no obligation to accept its script. Like Simone, you can say no. You can say, I will choose. You can say, I am more than you expected. Sleep now, Simone de Beauvoir. You did not just speak of freedom, you lived it. And in your words, in your fire, so many have found the strength to stand. Good night, voice of clarity. You were never second. You were and are the beginning of something vast.